in charge. Perfect. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our second ever A2J Tech Event. Speaking on behalf of the A2J team, we're so grateful and thrilled that people are interested in learning more about the ways that we can improve the legal tech space. So my name is Victoria. As you can see on the title and screen, I will be moderating our conversation today. Little preview of today's agenda, however. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then after that, we're going to have about 45 minutes of conversation and then 10 minutes for Q&A. So I know that the webinar chat, I believe, should be disabled, but if you do have a question, feel free to pop it into the Zoom provided Q&A, and Laura and Lacey will help make sure I see it, and then we pass it on to our panelists. So we'll answer you live. So I'm just going to go ahead and start introducing our panelists according to the list I've got over here on the side. If you see me look to the side. So Haley Shoaf is joining us from Launch Code, where she is the Vice President of Justice Programs. She coordinates tech education and job placement opportunities for justice-involved individuals. She's also the co-founder of Unlocked Labs, which employs currently incarcerated software developers building tech to help make education more accessible in prison. So thank you, Haley, for joining us. Dennis Schultz serves as the Executive Director for the Blacks in Technology Foundation, which is, according to LinkedIn, the largest community of Black people in the technology industry. So the Blacks in Technology Foundation aims to provide resources such as training, education, networking, and mentorship to lift up Black tech workers. And Tami Bonner is the Director of Social Enterprise at Dry Bones Denver, which is an organization committed to providing relationship-centered, non-judgmental support to teens and young adults affected by homelessness in downtown Denver. So I believe we can just get started with the questions. If you guys would like a copy of the Google Doc in the chat, I can drop the link as well, if that would help with you guys following along. I'll just drop it right now. Okay. So my first question is, there's a lot of talk recently about increasing diversity, rethinking the ways that we approach hiring and employment outreach. But can you, in your own words, describe why considering barriers to employment is important for employers? Tami, we're going to start with you.
You're going to start with me.
Yeah,
all right.
You're first on my screen.
Gosh, I was going to feed off the energy of all the other people that spoke today. So anyway, thank you. It's great to be here. And just to talk a little bit about rethinking barriers to employment and helping people just kind of understand what that looks like and how we move forward in that space. I think that it really starts with each of us really understanding the biases that we carry within ourselves that we don't even realize that we carry. So when you're talking about employment opportunities, we have two it's pretty common to have two things that people look for when they are hiring somebody. One is work history, and one is education. Those are two things that are kind of door openers or door closers. And so rather than inviting people into the possibilities and the abilities that a person has, they are immediately looking at the things that many people with barriers have not had the opportunity to be involved in. And so I'm thinking again about the way the question is phrased. It's like, why do we consider barriers to employment important? The main reason that it's important is because you immediately shut out a large sector of possibility when you don't allow people in the door that have very specific barriers. So we like to believe that we want to introduce organizations into a whole nother level of possibility, people that are tenacious, that are hardworking, that are bright, that have just not had the same experiences as many of the people that are being hired currently.
Right. Haley, I don't know if you had any more thoughts about why considering barriers to employment is important for employers?
Sure. And by way of context, I do a lot of work with the justice involved population. And so helping folks that are currently formerly incarcerated think about jobs and next steps. And, prior to that, I've spent a long time working in tech job placement more broadly and kind of working with folks that might not have sort of college degrees or traditional credentials, even just like being considered for jobs. And I think, kind of to echo some of the things that Tami said, there's just a lot of untapped talent in the world, I think, and especially at a very practical level, we live in like a world where the labor market is very tight and there's kind of a lot of constant transition, and just by closing off opportunities to groups of people based on perceived credentials or perceived lack of credentials and perceived background or lack of background, as opposed to considering people as individuals. I think oftentimes employers really close out the opportunity for really fantastic talent that can contribute to their mission. And so that's like a lot of when we have the conversations with employers about why they should think more expansively about hiring, it boils down to that, which is, are you considering all the options to find the best people that you can? And are you somehow limiting yourself in that search?
Yeah, absolutely. Dennis, do you have any additional thoughts to add?
Yes, just in addition to what Tami and Haley were saying, it's just a matter of practicality for a lot of these employers. I haven't talked to any company or organization who's not hiring specifically for tech talent. And there are simply not enough computer science majors, not enough people with 4-year degrees to fill all the open jobs that are available. So from an employer's perspective, if the math doesn't work, based on, traditional processes, then you need to expand that lens a little bit and include some folks that you previously didn't include in, or previously excluded specifically because they didn't have a 4-year degree or because they came from a non-traditional background. And it just makes good sense. All the studies show that diverse workforces are more aligned, more sustainable, more successful, more profitable. So it's not a matter of, is it going to work? I think we've proven that. It's a matter and function of, are we going to stick to old practices and not be flexible?
Right, right. So my follow-up question, I guess, is supposed to be targeting people who have come from that traditional background. They're not in management, they're in the workspace already. Why should they consider barriers to employment as well? We're going to go in reverse order again. Dennis, back to you.
So why should employees consider? Okay, so I think when you go in with an understanding of what the potential biases could be against you, whether you are justice impacted or you are self-taught as a software engineer, for example, you can mitigate some of those responses to those questions or some of those objections in advance. So to go in with a game plan and know that this is going to be an issue that comes up, and to have a succinct and thought through answer in the interview process, I think is a good place to start.
Yeah, I haven't thought about the interview process as well as being part of this cycle. Haley, do you have anything about that as well?
Yeah, I think it's something that we coach candidates to do all the time is to know your worth and to think about what you're bringing to the table in an employment situation. Because I think especially people from diverse and marginalized backgrounds will undersell themselves and their strengths in the workplace. And that, I think then can lead to all sorts of different predatory employment relationships, I think, especially if folks are perceived as doing a favor to people as opposed to kind of taking someone as their whole self. And then at the same time, we coach people to be hungry, and the best way to put your best foot forward is to show up and do great work and just kind of focus less on what you think people are going to think of you and more on just doing the work and getting it done. And that will speak for itself, hopefully.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Tami, any last thoughts about why considering barriers to employment is also important for employees in the workspace?
It's interesting. When I read that question, I actually was thinking, I didn't see it quite the way that I think it was being asked. I was actually thinking about other employees in the workplace. And so while there's a hiring manager that might be on board with participating in opening up to a more diverse hiring pool, sometimes there is challenge amongst other employees that in a culture that's already been set. And so I guess what I just think, and I'll chat about this a little bit more probably as we go on with the questions, but just starting to build a culture in your workplace so that everybody has buy-in to opening the door to a diverse population of people and learning from that experience and learning the you know, as Dennis said, you bring in a whole different perspective, all kinds of different abilities when you bring in a diverse workforce. And so sometimes it's a matter of just really educating the culture of the people that you work around and getting buy-in from everybody that's a culture you want to build.
Right. So this next question is all about that culture and building and profiting basically off of those new perspectives. So some people who have just discovered thinking about diversity in the workspace for the first time, they're thinking, okay, what are some concrete examples of those ways that a perspective, a new perspective, can tangibly affect the environment around you? So Haley, do you want to start us off about any stories or any examples you can think of?
Sure. I mean, I think we work a lot with justice involved folks, and I think we, as of late, have started to find that like justice tech organizations are particularly great places to place people in jobs that have been justice involved, because folks bring a diversity of experience and perspective to the problems they're solving that maybe people that haven't directly been affected by the same issues don't see. So one example is we have a group of guys that most of them are actually currently incarcerated, and they're working on building technology and platforms to increase access to education in prisons. And I think both from a individual user standpoint and from like a whole product standpoint, their ability to really understand the problem and kind of solve for it in the most efficient way has been very impressive to me. We had actually 2 weeks ago, I was at one of our correctional institutions, and we recently did a lot of lessons about like UX and user testing. And they kind of totally unbeknownst to me had set up a user testing station, and we're pulling all the case managers from the prison in to like test their product and like give feedback on it, which is like about as close real-time feedback as you can get. But similarly, like in the legal tech world, I mean, not just with A2J, but with a variety of organizations, we have consistently gotten feedback that a lot of the people out of our program make really great contributions and like come with like a sort of expanded skill set to especially this type of work.
Dennis, you also touched on perspectives in your previous answer. I wonder if you could give any concrete examples or stories.
Yeah. So, and we work with a lot of, I guess, entry-level tech workers and folks who are either in career or trying to advance their career. And one of the things that we found is that working with companies that hire, they don't necessarily realize that there are challenges in their process. And, you know, I'll give you an example of, there was a recent, well, I guess it's a controversy. Capitol Records had an AI generated rapper, and it was a Black rapper, but he was operated and controlled by white programmers. And in that scenario, if they would have had a team with diversity on it, they might have avoided a controversy that was, in our perspective, easily foreseen. But because they didn't have the purview or didn't really have the ethnic sensitivity, they just went forward with tech that they thought was cool. And functionally, it is very cool tech, but it just kind of missed the mark. So I think that's a good example of what employers could gain by having more diverse and inclusive workforces. And some folks, if you don't have senior leadership to kind of drive that messaging, it sometimes gets lost as you kind of move down the ranks to the folks who actually deployed products.
I cannot imagine the thought process that went on behind that. Tami, do you have any closing thoughts on any stories or concrete examples?
No, I think that just saying that our program, we spend a year in job training doing a lot of soft job skill training and doing a lot of job coaching and how to respond to challenges in the workplace, and working with young people who have clearly they bring forward an ability to survive, and so and work hard. And so I think that one of the things that people find as they hire young people that come out of our job training program is that, in fact, they have been coached on multiple interactive just abilities to interact in the workplace, to respond appropriately to customers, to respond appropriately to their team, that they've learned in the year that they've been with us in coaching, that many people coming from it just out of college even maybe don't have. So yeah, I just think that if you give people a chance that have had their self-esteem built up in a way that they realize that they are worthy and they can do this job and the skills that they bring are valuable, that you will find that you have a really good employee.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. For my next question, so I think, there are a lot of places where people mean well. They have great intentions. They want to be, warm and inclusive and welcoming in the environment, but they actually end up adding to the problem, creating new ones, perpetuating stereotypes, or singling people out even. What are some suggestions on how to avoid that when we are in the workplace? Tami, let's start with you.
I am thinking at this point of a particular example. We currently operate, our job training program is operating a coffee roastery. So we roast and bag and ship coffee. But we started with an actual coffee shop in the Five Points area of Denver, very popular coffee shop. And it was very well marketed. 5280, which is a big magazine here, did a feature on the coffee shop. So the community at large understood that this was a job training program for kids coming off the streets. And they were literally, we built relationships and moved them into this opportunity for a job. And people would regularly come in and ask really inappropriate questions of our staff, just like, oh, so you lived on the street? So tell me about that. So again, creating an atmosphere where people are being identified, not by their abilities, not by what they bring, but by someone else's curiosity. And while curiosity is really important as we start to learn and understand other cultures, other experiences, in that particular space, it's really empowering for, especially I think with our population, young people coming in, to be seen as an employee who is hired on the merit of their ability and not as, oh, this is the place where they hire street kids. How do you avoid that? I'm not always sure. I think a lot of it is just, again, cultural education on how to just be respectful of people that aren't come from a different space than you do. So
Right. And I imagine as a young person, your personality and identity are still developing, that can be especially harmful as well.
yeah.
Dennis, you also touched on this a little bit when they were creating, a black rapper. I'm sure they thought they were doing something with increasing diversity in night and but do you have any
Yeah.
thoughts on?
Yeah, and I mean, to Tammy's point, I mean, sensitivity training is something that a lot of larger companies will offer. Smaller companies may not think it's necessary, but you don't want to assume that everyone is as open-minded and is well-adjusted and is empathetic to other people coming in. So even though people might roll their eyes at sensitivity training, it does serve a necessary purpose, and to at least let people know that they should be aware of how they interact with people that don't look, sound, or act like them. Additionally, I think Tammy's point around meritocracy is also a good one, because one of the things that I combat in talking to organizations about hiring our members is they think it's affirmative action, or they're getting some type of special treatment. And I'm like, no, these folks actually know what they're doing. They have the skill to do what you're asking them to do. We just want a fair shot. So it's not about being overly correcting for biasness, to the point where you're hiring people who aren't qualified, but basically making sure that you are leveling the playing fields to just the merit of their work for consideration. I think that's really the key.
Right. Haley, do you have any thoughts on this subject as well?
Yeah, I think about it oftentimes in terms of people assuming that because folks are marginalized in one way or another, that they either need something that they don't, or like not knowing how to engage with understanding that someone might not ask for something that they need because of a circumstance that they're in, and like learning how to have dialogue with people in a way that's respectful. It's just like, hey, we try and coach like employers and managers and people that work with our clients to, hey, like start by asking, where are you at? What do you need support in? And set the expectation that like, as you need things, this is a safe space to ask questions, as opposed to saying, hey, I'm assuming that you're going to need X, Y, and Z support because you come from this background. When like one, I was actually laughing thinking about a conversation I had today, actually, which was with some like college student interns that we're bringing on to do some support for different parts of our program. And like meant it in a very well-intended way. They were like, oh, we're so excited to go in and like mentor these guys in prison. And I was kind of like, okay, you're 18. The person you're mostly going to go interact with like grown men who have had lives and careers and families and jobs, and like have come from all different walks of life and experiences, and like what they need is support practicing their tech interviewing skills, support with their resume, like connections and networks, but they like may not necessarily need like your mentor, for example, like assuming that this is going to be a dualistic relationship, right? There's like give and take, and you both have something to learn from each other, as opposed to coming in and being like, I'm gonna help this person, and I think you'll get more out of the relationship. And so that was just interesting. Like I think a lot of that is something that happens a lot, where people are like thinking that they're doing a favor or volunteering or engaging in some way, and aren't like necessarily open to, look, there's a lot of dualism that will make this a better experience for everyone.
Yeah, I really like the idea of redirecting towards better questions, more helpful relationship building questions, rather than the questions Tami was talking about that were happening at the coffee shop. So I think this next question is actually going to go to one of the Q&A questions. So a lot of people have great intentions, again, but if you're not in a policy making or hiring role at your workplace, they are not quite sure where to start or how to start and make it feel meaningful and not performative. So what are some ways that people can reduce performativity in their activism as employees? And then what are some ways people can get involved and get started with reducing barriers to employment, no matter where they are on the corporate ladder, so to speak? Haley, we're going to ping pong back to you.
Yeah, I think about the thing that comes up for me the most is thinking about making a statement versus producing a result. And like, I think especially in second chance hiring as a place where this is happening a lot right now, where like everyone's like, I joined a coalition and like I'm pro this and I'm gonna post on social media about how this is a good thing. But then I'm like, okay, I got a guy right now who, you know, got out of prison 6 months ago. He's a fantastic developer. You know, will you, not even will you give him a job, but like, will you interview him? And like all the same folks and companies and people that are like forwarding and posting the are like, oh, like, I don't know, there's all these different, like, and I think that you see that happen a lot where it's like everyone is down for the concept in theory. And then when it comes to taking tangible action, clams up, and there's not, it's somebody else's problem, right? Or it's somebody else, it's up to somebody else to take the real tangible next step. So I think a lot about like, what is the most, if the goal is to get somebody into sustainable employment, like what's the most actionable thing you can do to forward that? And that means like directly interviewing someone, directly having a conversation with your chief legal officer at your company, like being willing to be the person that like comes and takes somebody on your team, not just like likes this idea and concept.
Right. Tami, do you have any ideas as to what people can do?
I actually just listening to what Haley said, I think there is so much out there right now that we all want to be a part of that in theory feels good. And I think that many people really they are genuine in their desire. But it's like people who really want to have children because they have this really great idea about what it's going to be like to have children, and then they have children and there's like all kinds of challenges that they weren't expecting. I think that there needs to just be more education in the workplace. There needs to be more education about barriers. Like even in our organization, for a long time, every single position said you had to have a 4-year college degree. You just had, that was a requirement. And so we put up these barriers without even realizing how many people were shutting out that we don't need to shut out. And so for me, the idea really is around doing a lot of self-work about what your own personal biases are. If you have a 4-year degree, do you carry with you a bias about your ability compared to somebody else who doesn't, no matter what their training was? Are there biases in your workplace that as a culture you need to start talking about? Because you're not going to be able to bring somebody into the workplace, again, and I think I alluded to this earlier, without buy-in from the organization. Because if the organization has not made a stance about providing employment to people that face barriers, and the culture is not receptive to that, it will not be a safe place for those people to come and work. And so I know this isn't really the answer probably everyone is looking for, but in my mind, it's a lot about self-work. And it's a lot about, if that's something that you feel really important and that you would like to see happen in your workplace, then start really educating yourself and having conversations with the people who can hire, and partner with organizations and get to know people, do some mentoring, really understand where you're coming from personally. And then I think you can make changes. You can we can change culture. We just have to try it. And it has to be more than an idea. It has to be more than that sounds good and it feels good when I say that, or wear the right t-shirt. But I actually have to be willing to have lunch with somebody who's really different from me, who speaks differently than me, who wears different jewelry than I do. I know that sounds really weird, but like a lot of the street kids that I work with, sometimes they come in and I'm like, I must have a bias about this particular look because I'm feeling weird about it. And so then I need to do that self-work about, well, why? And I just think that that's the direction that we all need to start working, and things will change.
I love that idea. I love the idea that activism is supposed to be hard in some cases, you know. Dennis, any closing thoughts on this subject?
I think the women preceding me pretty much covered it. The only thing that I will say though is sometimes you have to put yourself in a position of vulnerability and expend some of that brand capital that you've built up within your organization to advocate for some other folks. So talk to your manager, talk to human resources, talk to legal, and challenge why there's that 4-year requirement. You know, why can't this role be re-credentialed? Or try to put yourself in a situation where you can be a part of the interview process. If you're not a hiring manager, hey, you know what? If there's a committee, try to sit on the committee. If there's a multi-interview process, then maybe you're one of the, you know, interviewers that are just recommending, you know, talking to the candidates and giving your opinion, you know, that type of thing. So it's not, I don't think there's no one way to address it, but I do know that change doesn't happen isolated and in a vacuum. You just have to put yourself out there a little bit sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of change and isolation, the next question is about how you guys feel the pandemic has related or impacted barriers to employment, and not just, you know, remote work, but also access to resources and that kind of thing. So Dennis, I'm going to ping pong back to you.
Okay, well, it's a double-edged sword, in my opinion, because what the pandemic showed us is that, you know, remote work is real and it's here and it's not going back in a box. You know, folks like to work from home, and that's great for folks with experience. The other side is that if you don't have a lot of experience and you do need that, you know, coaching and guidance and somebody that you can tap on the shoulder and say, hey, how do I do this? You know, sometimes that gets lost in a remote work scenario. So depending on your perspective, I guess, really depends on if the pandemic and remote work is good or a challenge. I think for most of the folks that I deal with, and again, I'm dealing with a lot of folks who are looking to transition into tech and get that first role. I try to tell them, even though it sounds good to, you know, have a remote job, don't necessarily limit yourself to remote work, because, you know, in office could be very beneficial, especially early in career. So I think that's my perspective. I mean, pandemic and, you know, remote work are kind of synonymous to me.
I feel like Tami and Haley, you guys are working with very different populations with points of view on how the pandemic has affected. So I'm going to punt the question over to Tami first.
We are working with a population that honestly remote work is not an option. It's just not. I mean, I don't also want to become a person who makes blanket statements, but it is not. We are working with young people who are getting often their first job outside after the training program that they've been in with us and working with us in the coffee business. They are then moving into their first job or going into school. One of those two things usually. And so many of them are getting into their first space of housing. While they're in our program, they have come from being unhoused. And so the pandemic was actually kind of terrible for us. They couldn't be with us. We couldn't all be in one space where they're used to being, where we work together and do coaching and curriculum and all the things that we do in that 12-month period. And so it feels a lot more back to normal now for us. But remote working was just not really, I mean, many of our kids don't have access to technology outside of the technology that they use in our space, apart from a phone. So they weren't doing a lot of remote working.
What about you, Haley?
I mean, I've seen things play out on both sides of the coin, and I think it has a lot to do with like background and specific circumstance and where someone is at. Like one thing we saw at just like launch code writ large, not related to our like justice program specifically, was that actually as we went remote, that was an asset to some of the folks that we were working with, but we're mostly talking about like, you know, adults that are probably 25 to 45 that are moving, you know, from like a service industry job to a high wage job. And in those cases, both from a learning environment and from a job environment, it provided them more flexibility and like sort of took away some of the barriers in terms of transportation, other things like that had previously been like a big thing we contend with a lot is transportation. Like how does somebody kind of get somebody to a job, especially if they don't have a car, and in St. Louis in particular, public transit is not great. But it created additional barriers too of like, but oftentimes barriers that employers were more ready to beat, which is like, I think for a lot of people, it's much easier to get someone a laptop and make sure they have Wi-Fi than it is to make sure that they have transportation covered inclusively. That being said, I think for folks, especially people that we saw that were like just getting out of prison, the pandemic definitely augmented a lot of challenges, and you're looking at, I think, gaps in digital literacy in particular, where it's like one thing to reorient to the world, it's another thing to have to relearn an entirely new skill set and way of operating in a professional context, and to kind of do that on top of a lot of other things that were going on. So with that, with guys that we're working with that are really close to reentry, we found trying to place them on site at employers tends to lead to better outcomes.
So I'm cognizant of the time and I'm getting pinged about having to check on the Q&A. So I'm going to pivot to the Q&A, and then I really think it's important to give you guys a little soapbox key takeaway moment. So we'll come back to that after the Q&A. But I have a Q&A up now. And the first question is, have you heard of situations in which marginalized job seekers end up competing with each other for work? Is it possible to support each other in those situations despite the necessary competition? I'm just going to open it up to the floor to see if anybody has some preliminary thoughts on that.
I'll jump in. My perspective is, may the best man win. So yeah, I mean, it's a competitive job market, even though there are a lot of jobs available in tech. One of the things I always tell people when they approach an interview is don't expect preferential treatment. You know, if you're going into a situation where you think they're looking for a diverse candidate, right? You know, first and foremost, know your craft and assume that somebody is going to be more experienced and better than you going in. So, you know, work hard, be prepared, you know, show up and be energetic, and assume that there's going to be a candidate that's better than you, and you need to be better than them on this day. But yeah, competition is part of it. And if they don't go in with that mindset, then they're probably not the right person for the job in the first place.
Haley, you look like you're gathering some thoughts there.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, I feel like my experience has been that by and large, if you can develop networks for people to support one another, that tends to work better than helping people feel like they're in competition with each other. I think, yeah, so like, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with like building community and networks, and in some cases even organizing power. around the folks that are from similar backgrounds and a sense of camaraderie to be able to collectively work together to support one another and make each other stronger in the direction of getting more people employed.
All right. Tammy, you look like you agree.
Yeah, I was just thinking that really for in the sector that many of our young people are going to be seeking employment, it is going to be competitive because there's a lot of people seeking that level of employment. But part of what we do is train on your worth and your value and walking in the door with confidence. And then also understanding that you may get this and have the confidence that you can and that you deserve it. But if you don't get it, that's another opportunity for processing how to manage disappointment and not shame spiral, but instead just know that this is a part of life and you're gonna have the confidence we hope to move in that space again. So you know, it's a tricky balance of really what everyone is saying of being confident and competitive, but also being empathic and gracious and knowing that we're all trying to get work and there is enough work out there. We just have to figure out how to get it.
Absolutely. I'm also going to tuck shame spiral away into my vocabulary for later. For the next question is, so when people want to improve, but don't know what to change or how to implement changes, it's moving up. What resources are there for them to learn specific effective steps to take and how to take them? Should they hire someone to advise about those changes? And where can they find those people? I know it's a longer question, so.
Can I ask you just a clarifying question? Are you asking for organizations that want to look to diversify their hiring? What are some resources that they could use? Is that what you're asking?
I think that's what this attendee is asking, but if we've interpreted it wrong, feel free to put that in the chat as well.
I'm not answering it. I'm just clarifying. I'm thinking. I guess if that's the question, then I think that again, there are a lot of organizations that are providing training and coaching for people who are looking to move into the workplace. And it's just, I mean, that's a great question. Like, where do you find these people? There are organizations like gosh, I'm just trying to think now. Somebody else on the panel needs to jump in at this point and help me.
I'll jump in and throw your lifeline there, Tammy. And I don't know of organizations specifically that you could hire, but my first thought went to mentorship and having somebody you can talk to, a coach or somebody who's been there before you. There's an organization called the Global Mentorship Initiative, and they are indeed global, and they have specific focus on students and younger people. But what they do is they'll pair you with someone who is either in the same career or specialization as you. And the goal is to identify where your weaknesses are and what they can do to help develop those weaknesses into strengths. So that's one that I could give you. I don't know if I have any others though. And Global Mentorship Initiative, if you didn't catch it the first time, is what it is.
Yeah, if I could have one of my IT tech fairies drop the link in the chat for their website or something like that. Haley, any ideas of resources?
Yeah, I mean, my instinct would be the same as everybody else's, which is there's a lot of organizations out there that are, and a lot of people I think that also want to help other people and are looking for ways to give back. And so even if it's not through like a formal organization, but think about just like where are behaviors that you want to exhibit or people that you want to learn from, and like are there ways to get connected to either folks like that or communities like that. You know, in one example is in the like justice involved technologist space, there's a group called Underdog Devs that is a lot, basically it's just a giant Slack group that's full of predominantly people that have been justice involved in some way they're trying to break into tech, and then like technologists that work for companies, et cetera, that are interested in volunteering their time and engaging in some way. And there's like, they started a more of a formal program over time, but especially early on, it was very informal, and it was just like people could get help on with whatever they needed from people that had access time to give and wanted to help in some way. I think too, a lot of it is just partially being like self-aware and open to feedback. And like, if you can pinpoint, here's where I'm at and here's where I want to be, and then can like open up to take feedback from people that you're working with, that is, I think, often half the battle in being able to improve.
Haley, could you repeat that organization's name one more time? I think somebody in the queue.
Oh, it's called Underdog Devs, like underdog developers.
Thank you. All right, this next question I really resonate with because I think it's something a lot of people who are minorities have to think about all the time. How do you approach the diversity conversation without individuals getting defensive? Like Haley mentioned, it seems like they would prefer to make a statement than do the actual work. Any preliminary thoughts on that?
I have thoughts. So, you know, this is just from my personal experience and background. So I've spent, you know, over 26 years in tech in roles that are, you know, definitely situations where I'm the minority, either the only person on my team or the only person in my division in some cases of color. And the thing is that if I feel uncomfortable, I don't mind starting a conversation with someone about why I feel uncomfortable, but I try not to make them feel defensive in the process. And depending on the person, kind of depends on my tone. I never want to come in hot, so to speak. So I'm conscious and aware that, you know what, I'm sure they didn't mean to offend. So I always give everyone the benefit of the doubt before I approach them, but I'm not shy about saying, hey, you know what, I think that was a little insensitive, or that comment she made about, you know, this person, you know, it made me feel uncomfortable. And, you know, and can we have a talk about it? And, you know, most of the time, if I approach it like that, I get a positive response. You know, I don't think most people feel that they're being attacked because, you know, I'm pretty direct, but I'm also pretty tactful. So I don't know if there's any good answer to that, but that's just been my approach personally.
Tami, Haley, any tips on how to be tactful yet direct about these kinds of conversations?
I think that, again, as being a person who has not got I don't have lived experience as a person of color. I don't have lived experience as a person that has been unhoused. I really try to talk a lot about my own journey of learning about other people and understanding deeply held, almost DNA held biases that I wasn't even aware of, but not being aware doesn't make it true, doesn't mean that it's not there. And so trying to really talk about me as opposed to you. I don't know if a lot of people who are in the nonprofit world are, I don't know if we're tactful or not. I mean, we have a lot to say and we have a lot to get done. And so I think sometimes I'm not tactful, but I don't want people to be defensive, because the minute those defenses come up, it's very hard for them to hear anymore. And the conversation is usually not productive. But for me, it's just about talking about things I've read or things I've noticed about myself and things that have made me uncomfortable, and me exploring why that is.
One thing that comes to mind that has been part of kind of my own experience and journey is in approaching these kinds of conversations, figuring out how to like sort of test the waters or have peer conversations as well before necessarily confronting like an issue head on, where it's like, for example, if you're the only minority in the workplace. I'm not saying like this is just if they're are there other people maybe that are at your manager level or that are kind of surrounding you that can be a sounding board, that might be people in a position of privilege that can help be an advocate for your message and you can bounce it off of first. Because I think that there's oftentimes like, especially, and I can speak to this more from like a gender lens than from like a racial lens, but I've dealt with like a lot of challenges with it being like the only woman in a technology workplace, and finding like men who were my peers and saying, hey, like here's kind of some of the things I'm seeing. Do those resonate with you? Also, would you be willing to like help me in this dialogue or even be an advocate or like test the water for somebody else, like the boss, has been an effective strategy. I think like diversity and inclusion conversations have become, they're not ubiquitous in all spaces, but it's the kind of place where like you're likely to find allies in some environments, and like not necessarily taking that on as like you need to take that conversation on alone, but are there folks that can help do the work in terms of and like help you in that journey.
Great ideas here. This is my favorite part. I get to ask you guys one key takeaway from this talk for people who may have zoned out or something. And while you say your key takeaway, can you also say how we can find you guys, or for attendees who want to connect with your organizations, perhaps, what's the best way to reach you? Tami, you started us off, so if you'd like to round out the webinar today.
Is this when I get to get on my soapbox?
Yes.
I'm kidding. I think that the thing that I just want to share with people is that when we're talking about barriers to employment, but it's so much deeper than that. It's really goes back to biases that we carry about very specific people. In my case, I work with a very diverse population. They're mostly young. They have been unhoused. 40% are a part of the LGBTQ plus community. People carry biases. When you drive by somebody that is holding a sign on the street, you carry a bias about that, and you have dehumanized that person most likely, so that you don't need to look at them. You don't need to feel really anything. You've created in your own mind why they're that way, why I think that way about them, and why they don't deserve whatever. And so what I always hope these opportunities create are just times for people to think about, what biases do I hold? What things do I think that I don't even think about? There's so much a part of what I believe. Why do I believe them? And is there a chance that I'm wrong and that I can see things differently? And as we start to understand people differently, as we start to appreciate people as humans, each individual with their own very diverse experiences in life, barriers to employment will start to drop, because we will stop believing that very specific people deserve something and very other specific people somehow do not. And I just hope every day that more and more people start to just realize, I'm creating some of this and I want to change it. So, and we are, if you want to support Purple Door, Dry Bones Denver is an organization, like I said, is a relational organization. We are out on the streets building relationships with young people that are on the streets. Purple Door Coffee is our job training program. So when young people have made a decision that they'd like to move forward with trying to develop skills that will help them gain employment and keep employment, they can come and apply at Purple Door. It is a 12-month job training program where we We like to say we rebuild, and by rebuild, we mean we rebuild confidence, self-esteem. Sometimes it's not even rebuilding, it's just building. And then we train, and then we partner with other businesses for next step jobs. And then we coach for 12 months after our employees have been placed with another business. So the best way to support us is to buy our coffee. So go online and buy our coffee, but also just start to build those relationships for next step jobs. That is always something we're looking to do. So thank you for the opportunity.
Of course, and not a hardship at all to buy more coffee. I think I've had a lot of coffee during this entire talk. Well, Haley, take us away. What's your takeaway for this webinar?
Yeah, no, this is a great conversation, and I think is echoing what I must believe, which is that like people are people, and I do a lot of work in particular, bringing people from a variety of companies and hiring roles into prison facilities, and I think like have a lot of dialogue with people around. Most of the time, people's reactions and expectations to that experience is, oh, these are just people. Which like seems like it should be a no-brainer. It was like, yep, this is like it's still a person. And I think we build up these things in our minds around like, and as kind of Tami was saying, put labels around the experience of somebody rather than just like experiencing them as a human being. And when you can like get beyond that second chance employees in particular make some of the like strongest and best employees many employers have often experienced, like super high drive, work ethic, often like great like lived experience and resilience, and it's all about just like setting them up for success. Yeah, and so to that end, the program that I sort of do two things or wear two hats, which is I run an offshoot of a program called Launch Code that is a tech training and job placement program for low-income adults. But the Just Tech program that I run is specifically, we do that training for people that are mostly currently incarcerated, and then try and help them to build pathways to employment upon release. And as a subset of that, we run a program called Unlocked Labs, which is actually a work release program where we employ people that are currently incarcerated with a focus on building technology and doing work in the justice tech space. So actually empowering and engaging justice involved folks to use technology to solve problems in the justice system, which I think is very closely adjacent to the sort of legal tech access to justice tech world.
Absolutely. And also thank you, Laura, for dropping all these links in the chat. Hopefully people are able to save those for later. All right, Dennis, your soapbox moment has come.
All right, and I will try to be brief. My soapbox tends to be very long and winded, but really quickly, we I think had a very interesting conversation. I learned a couple of things today, and just understanding to double check my biases as well, and in daily interactions. But if I had to just give one takeaway, it's make sure that if you see something, say something. That's the New York City motto for everything post 9/11. And I believe that if you don't feel comfortable with the way things are in your workplace, or you think that things could be different, be vocal about it. And I can't tell you how many times that I've had what I call unsuspecting allies in the workplace that I didn't know felt the same way as I did until they spoke up and they said something. And it's not only encouraging for the people that they're advocating for, but it also shows the company or the organization, the leaders, the executive leadership, that there are employees who care about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it doesn't change unless you help force and initiate change. So that's kind of my takeaway. And I know we're at time, so really quick, if you want to find out about Blacks in Technology, blacksintechnology.org is the URL. It'll take you to our nonprofit page. It's free to join. We advocate for the inclusion of people of African descent all over the globe. help them get into tech with resources, grants, scholarships, mentorship, you name it. If it has something to do with tech, we'll probably be some way involved. But that's it. Hopefully, didn't run over time.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. This has been a very informational and educational talk that I think is really necessary for workplaces to have. So I'm so excited that you guys were able to participate in it. I know we're at time, so really quick plug for all of our attendees. Thank you so much for attending today. And also stay tuned because our next event is on, I'm going to pull up my notes real quick, November 9th at 2 p.m. EST. It's called For the People, by the People, Accessing Legal Resources and Information Through Tech. So stay tuned for that information as well. All right, I believe that's it. Thank you so much again, and have a great night, everybody. Bye.